Welcome everyone to another session on current affairs by CIVILS360 Academy. In this session, we will be studying about the Paris Agreement, which is celebrating its 10th anniversary, and we will also be discussing India's nationally determined contributions and the assessment of the same, like what is the progress India has made on that front. So to talk about the Paris Agreement, there is a lot of other informations like UNFCCC and the Agenda 21. The COP, which is conducted annually. So we will not be delving deeper into those topics. We will be discussing more about Paris Agreement. But keep in mind, when you are studying for UPSC Prelims, UNFCCC, especially these three Agenda 21 conventions are there. You have the UN Convention on Biodiversity, UN Convention on combating desertification, UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. So these three conventions are very important, and two of those conventions are legally binding. UNFCCC is not legally binding, but UNCBD and CCD is considered legally binding. So whenever you study a particular treaty, you need to know whether India is part of it, whether it is legally binding, what does it aim to do, things like that. So to talk about the Paris Agreement, just to give you an introduction, the COP30, the Conference of Parties, which is actually the apex decision-making body for UNFCCC, was actually meeting at Belém in Brazil. So it was actually COP30. So we will look into an important COP, like for example, Paris Agreement was such an agreement which was formulated in 2015, right? Okay, it was at COP21. So remember, COP21 and 2015. So just like that, every year COP is being conducted as part of UNFCCC, and COP30 this year was at Belém. And then to talk about the climate change, we will look into the climate finance, what is the argument, what is the general argument of developing countries. Then so we will look a little bit about those kind of things. Okay, so this was the news at Belém, the developing nations' views on accelerating Paris Agreement to be published today, and the Paris Agreement at 10. So, Paris Agreement is one of the most foundational agreements to tackle climate change. So, just to give you a little bit of background, the Kyoto Protocol was actually kind of like a predecessor to the Paris Agreement. Kyoto Protocol actually differentiated between developed countries and developing countries. It actually created two sets of countries, Annex 1 and then you have non-Annex 1 countries. So Annex 1 countries refers to the developed countries, and non-Annex 1 were the developing countries. They were given separate targets to decarbonize. And Kyoto Protocol was actually formulated in 1997. It was formulated in 1997. It was a legally binding protocol, and then there was an amendment in a Doha amendment was in 2012, and after the Doha amendment, it was actually extended for 2020. Right, so it was extended till 2020. So remember, Kyoto Protocol is until 2020. Okay, and it was kind of like a predecessor to the Paris Agreement. So it it asked the developed countries and developing countries to decarbonize, with more stringent targets were placed on developed countries, which became a sticking point, and then it kind of fell out afterwards. The Doha Amendment actually was not signed by Canada, USA, and some of the developed countries. So the Kyoto Protocol actually established the carbon emission emission units. So it actually created carbon market, and the carbon market is actually known as the clean development mechanism. A similar system is created by Paris Agreement, but this system is actually applicable to the entire world. Kyoto Protocol actually created the clean development mechanism, but that actually applied only to the developed countries, whereby developed countries would buy emission reduction units from developing countries. But this the Paris Agreement actually creates the we will look into that sustainable development mechanism, which actually applies to all the countries. So carbon markets are also an important topic. We will be discussing that. So then okay, just remember, okay, so whenever you study COPs, we will be discussing, giving a separate video on the COPs. But remember, Kyoto Protocol, remember the Copenhagen Accord of 2009, okay? That also you have to remember. Then the Paris Agreement was actually formulated, like I said, in 2015 at COP21. So remember, COP21. And the condition for, coming into force is, it should be ratified by countries that were actually contributing to at least 55% of the global carbon emissions. So when 55% of countries that contribute to carbon emissions actually ratify the Paris Agreement, it will come into force. That was the the term. So remember that condition as well. And remember, the latest country to actually join Paris Agreement is actually Eritrea, which is in the Horn of Africa. Okay, Eritrea. Okay, now remember Article 28. Certain articles are important for Paris Agreement. One of those reason is because UPSC has directly asked, certain articles. Article 6 was, detailed in asked in last year, 2025. So just be aware of these articles. Like for example, Article 28 is the article by which countries are actually exiting from the Paris Agreement. This is important because US under Trump in the first term actually exited, then Joe Biden joined, then Trump again withdrew. So it was in news. So there is a chance for Article 28 to be asked. And also, if you have any confusion, go to the text of the Paris Agreement and just read. It's not a big agreement, but just read with the presence of mind. You can see certain terms. Okay. So if you have any doubts, do that. So Article 28 enables a country to withdraw from Paris Agreement, but then you have to give a notice to the custodian of the agreement, which is actually the UNFCCC Secretariat is there. So they are actually the custodian of the the Paris Agreement. So to them, they have to give the notice, and after giving the notice, 1 year after that depository is getting notified, it is will be withdrawn. You can actually withdraw. So 1 year notice period. So you give the notice, and after 1 year only you can actually withdraw. Okay, and there is another cooling off 3-year period is there. That is after the agreement has come into force. That is, Joe Biden actually joined, right, in the second time, Joe Biden actually joined the Paris Agreement, right. So from that period onwards, 3 years, they cannot actually exit because the agreement is coming into force, and after the agreement has come into force for 3 years, they can't actually exit. But Trump, now I think the cooling period is over, then they can actually withdraw. Okay. So just remember the 3-year and 1 year and Article 28. Okay, now going into detail about the Paris Agreement. It was actually signed on the 12th December 2015. So this is the the anniversary that we are actually celebrating when we say that it is at 10. It was actually signed on the 22nd April. So remember two facts. 22nd April is also the Earth Day. 22nd April of 2016, and it became effective on the 4th November of 2016. That is also an important date. It has 195 parties. Another important point. Okay. Now another important thing you have to remember is that Paris Agreement by itself, if they ask like it's legally binding, it is technically legally binding, but the legally binding is actually limited to the procedure aspects of the agreement. That is, if a particular state is actually part of the Paris Agreement, then there is a condition that they have to submit nationally determined contributions, and they have to revise it every 5 years, and each revision should be an improvement over the last. So these certain aspects are actually legally binding, but the Paris Agreement, keep it clear, does not actually demand the nation to fulfill its nationally determined contributions. Okay, it says that you just have to file the nationally determined contribution, and each filing after 5 years, each update after 5 years should be an improvement over the last. That's all what the Paris Agreement actually says. Okay, so remember the non-ratifying countries: Greenland, Iran, Libya, and Yemen. So remember there are 4 non-ratifying countries: Greenland, Iran, Libya, and Yemen. And US, again, we know that withdrew it in 2025. And the target of Paris Agreement is actually to reduce the increase in temperature from well below 2 degrees Celsius, and it tries to achieve the target of 1.5 degrees Celsius. It is the target, and for this it was actually mentioned that the emissions have to actually peak in 2025, and then it has to reduce sharply by about 43%. Emissions have to be reduced by 43% after it peaks in 2025 by 2030 over the 2019 levels. So a lot of years are there, but I just mentioned this for your clarity, because this is the target that usually it comes in the news. So 43% of 2019 levels. So whatever was the emissions in 2019, 43% of that emissions have to be reduced by 2030 after the emissions peak in 2025. Okay, then only we can achieve the 1.5 degrees Celsius target. So keep that information in your mind. Okay. Okay. Then for another important fact regarding Paris Agreement is that a party can actually accede, that is ratify or subscribe to the terms of the agreement without signing it. It has a provision for that as well. Okay. Then it has a 16 introductory paragraphs and 29 articles. Okay, 29 articles. Okay. Another very important fact is that it covers most of the greenhouse gas emissions in the world, except for emissions by international aviation as well as shipping. So keep it clear in your mind. It does not include the emissions from shipping as well as aviation. Aviation and shipping emissions are excluded from the purview of Paris Agreement because it is actually regulated by the International Civil Aviation Organization for aviation and International Maritime Organization for shipping. So emissions from these two are not within the purview of Paris Agreement. Okay. Now, how does the Paris Agreement actually reduce emissions? So first is the unilateral efforts, which is the efforts made by a country by its own. That is basically through the nationally determined contributions. And remember, the article which established nationally determined contributions is Article 4. Article 3 actually explains how the NDCs will be carried out, but which article actually establishes NDCs? It is Article 4. So please keep that in mind. Okay, and nationally determined contributions are based on the principle of common but differentiated responsibility but respective capabilities. That is, each country according to their capability has to commit to the climate change efforts, but they have differentiated responsibilities because we know about the historical emissions, right? US and India, if you compare, or you can say you take UK and India. UK obviously after went through the Industrial Revolution, it had taken up a lot of, or it had released a lot of greenhouse gas emissions to get to its level of development as of now, right? But India has not yet reached that stage. So obviously, who is a larger emitter, or who according to history emitted the most greenhouse gas? Obviously UK, right? So UK has more responsibility. That is why we say the differentiated responsibilities. Okay, but since this is all part of our as the climate change, we all live here, right? Since the carbon that is emitted in India, we cannot say that it's not negatively impacting the people living in UK, right? So it is a common responsibility, but still it is a differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities, right? The capabilities of UK and India is obviously different, right? So that all are factored in the Paris Agreement. And remember the key word: common but differential responsibility and respective capabilities. Remember the keyword; it's useful for your mains. Okay. So the targets are set every 5 years and should be registered by the UNFCCC Secretariat. Okay, each further ambition should be more ambitious than the previous one. This principle is known as the principle of progression. So they may simply ask, right, the principle of progression is associated with which of the following? So you need to be, you need to know that it is associated with the Paris Agreement, okay? Because every 5 years a country has to submit the nationally determined contributions, and according to the principle of progression, each NDC should be better than the last. Okay, then countries can also cooperate and pool their NDCs. Okay, they can cooperate and pool their NDCs, and we will be discussing how that happens. This is actually in Article 6, which was actually the theme of the previous year question. But remember, countries can cooperate and pool their NDCs. Okay, remember Article 3 and Article 4. Okay, now this is the aspect when I said Paris Agreement by itself is legally binding. Which aspect? The procedural aspect regarding NDCs. That bit is actually legally binding. Okay, but the NDCs are not actually legally binding. A country can renege on its promise, right? They can fail to meet the target. But whenever they say that, okay, we are trying to do it, okay, then the Paris Agreement says, okay, fine, you have to try to do it. It does not make the NDCs binding. Okay, I hope that is clear. Okay. Okay, so this is the global stocktake. Global stocktake was actually finalized or agreed upon by the 2018 Talanoa Dialogue. So basically, you have to remember the Talanoa Dialogue is actually associated with the Paris Agreement. It's associated with the global stocktake, where all the COP members will come together and evaluate the contributions, the NDCs of various countries, and they will also offer a platform for the countries to submit the next updated and upgraded NDCs. So Dubai, which was in 2023, right? COP 28. Okay, remember COP 28 and 2023 and Dubai. This was the first global stocktake, wherein India had actually said, okay, we have a lot of improvements, like okay, we will talk about India later, but basically at this COP, India actually updated its NDC. So we look at the updated NDCs as well, and the next stocktake will be in 2028. Okay, so at COP 33, but the location is not yet, on the, it's not clear. But still remember, 5 years based on the principle of progression. Remember the last global stocktake, and remember India's NDCs, which we will discuss later. Okay, now reducing emissions via cooperation. So Paris Agreement provides these two mechanisms. This is provided in Article 6. In Article 6, so like I said, like I discussed about the Kyoto Protocol, which established for the first time a carbon market using the emission reduction units. Similarly, the Paris Agreement also tries to establish a carbon market, and it's called the Sustainable Development Mechanism. And the difference between Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement is this market will be universal. It will include both developed and developing countries. There is no differentiation between them. So remember, Sustainable Development Mechanism. Okay, it was finalized in COP 26 Glasgow 2021. Okay, so remember COP 26 Glasgow 2021, where the Sustainable Development Mechanism as well as the international transfer of mitigation outcomes. This is also important. This is important because we don't usually see this term in news. International transfer of mitigation outcomes. So this is again, it works on the same aspect or same principle of carbon markets. So one country can actually, if it has a higher target of NDCs, okay, say let's take about India. India has, say it has an NDC 50% of electricity will be generated from non-fossil sources, okay, by 2030. Okay, So let's say that another country is actually having excess capacity of non-fossil based electricity, right? Say Bhutan or some other, Nepal, some Himalayan country. India can actually, what it can do? It can actually buy the non-fossil based electricity, right? And it will be made part of the NDC, provided it is, registered under the International Transfer of Mitigation Outcomes. So whenever India buys like that, it has to ensure that it's not doubly counted, right? Which was the issue in Kyoto Protocol. It was observed that there was a lot of double counting, and the valuation of the the emission unit, okay, that's another topic, but basically that's why Kyoto Protocol failed. One reason was that it made different targets for the developed countries and developing countries. Second reason for its failure was because of the valuation of the emission reduction certificates that was issued by the clean development mechanism was actually not accepted by the buyer and seller. There was a lot of developed countries said that, okay, we can't buy it at this rate, and the value of that certificate actually collapsed. Okay, that was the Kyoto Protocol. So the Paris Agreement is actually a revamped carbon market, and this is basically to avoid the failures of Kyoto Protocol's mechanism. It ensures that the corresponding adjustments, remember the word, corresponding adjustments will be made by one country and the buyer and seller, right? So India will ensure that it will mark on its balance sheet, it will mark plus, right? Because it has added to its international transfer of mitigation outcomes. But this value will not be part of the NDCs of, say, Nepal or Bhutan, right? So they have to minus the value, right? Because we are actually buying it. India bought that non-fossil based electricity. So India's ITMO will increase, right? India's NDCs will be added. Their NDCs, since this will be part of their NDCs, that will not be included. So that will be minus. So a corresponding adjustment mechanism is provided by the Paris Agreement under Article 6. These are all provided in Article 6. That is why it was in news repeatedly. That is why UPSC actually asked it, because it's a very, very foundational idea to the Paris Agreement. So I hope these systems are clear. Okay, both of them together make up the carbon markets. Okay, another important concept is regarding the Global Pact for the Environment. The Global Pact for the Environment, it was actually established in 2017, and what it aims to do is it actually tries to give out or establish a legally binding environmental rights charter. Okay, so basically you need to know about the ICCPR and ICESCR, which is actually Civil and Political Rights, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, International Covenant on Economic and Social Rights. These are the first generation and second generation rights. So the Global Pact of the Environment, which consists of international environmental law experts. Okay, so the question may be, the Global Pact for the Environment is an intergovernmental forum consisting of various countries. That might be the statement. The statement is wrong. Keep it in your mind. Global Pact for the Environment consists of experts on environmental law. It is not consisting of countries. It is consisting of experts on environmental law. So it was established in 2017. And what it aims to do, it tries to give the rights and duties of citizens and governments towards the environment, right? This is what is known as the third generation rights. These are third generation rights. First generation right is civil and political, second generation is economic and social, and third generation is actually environmental rights. Third generation rights, right? Okay. The next important is the principles that are actually mentioned in the Global Pact for the Environment. Certain principles in regard to environmental protection. We know the precautionary principle. We know about the polluter pays principle, right? We know that Supreme Court has actually acknowledged these principles. So we will not look into the case laws where it has been established, but keep in mind India has adopted Supreme Court has accepted, precautionary principle, polluter pays principle, etc. Okay, so basically these principles are part of the global pact for the environment. Then you have the prevention principle, which says that all the necessary means to prevent the loss damage should be taken. Duty to repair, there is a duty on citizens as well as state to repair the environment. Precautionary principle, if there is no certainty, if there is lack of scientific support on the damage a particular project can cause, then that project should not be undertaken. Okay, that project should be avoided. That is actually the precautionary principle. If there is any risk of any serious damage, unless scientific evidence support the contrary, it should not be undertaken. Polluter pays, whoever pollutes must pay. Okay, now moving on to India's NDCs. So initially, after the Paris Agreement was actually ratified by India, it actually gave the intended national determined contributions, but then it updated it on 2022. Right. So initially this was the targets. Like there were a few other targets, but the main target was reduction of emission intensity. Okay, by 33 to 35% by 2030 from 2005 levels, right? And 40% electric power installed capacity from non-fossil fuels by 2030. Okay, this was part of the 2015 INDC, Intended Nationally Determined Contributions, and it was observed that the government observed that these targets were met before deadline, that is before 2030. It was already met in 2022, right? So they updated the the nationally determined contributions in 2022. Okay, 2022, and now the target is emissions intensity will be reduced by 45% of GDP by 2030 from the 2005 levels. But remember, 45. The target on cumulative electric power installed capacity from non-fossil fuel based energy resources has been enhanced to 50%. Okay, by 50% by 2030. Then carbon sink target is also there, 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. Okay, so these are not just the targets, there are also other targets. So but basically please remember this, because it will be part of regular discussions on climate change, right, over the years, like next year or the year after that, because this is a recurring issue. It's an existential crisis for mankind. So it will be appearing in news. So we need to understand the India's progress towards the NDC. What is the progress also? You need to know the targets, you need to know the progress, because they can directly ask, UPSC mains can directly ask that question. So remember the targets, remember the progress, the latest progress, right? Okay. Okay, this is the current status that I was just talking about. This is the status of the world, okay? So the estimates suggest that the emissions are not reducing. They said that emissions have to peak in 2025 and decrease, right? But the emissions are not decreasing after 2025. It said that the current NDC contributions across the world will actually amount to an increase of 3 degrees Celsius by the end of this century, right? By the end of this century, that is by the end of 2000, or when we reach 2100, 3 degrees Celsius would be increased. So this is the target that I mentioned in the beginning. This is the target to achieve 1.5 degrees Celsius. Just remember this, because it comes usually repeatedly in news, right? So you can use it somewhere. Okay, so these are actually the, if you observe, these are actually per capita emissions. Per capita. Okay, per capita emissions. So basically the developing countries, the same logic as UK and India, same logic. They're saying that one person in a developing country is emitting far less carbon dioxide as compared to one person in the industrialized nations. So this is the basically that amount. See, India, it's like 3 carbon 2 equivalent tons. Okay, tons. 3 tons of carbon dioxide per person. Okay, that is the emission. But look at Russia, 17.9 tons of carbon dioxide, 17.4 tons of carbon dioxide. Okay, and these are the changes from 2023 to 24. India's increase is like 2.7%, while we see countries like Russia like 2.5% increase. That's still increasing, right? So where is the equity in it? Where is the justice in it? That is basically the angle of the developing countries. Also, the developing countries also, you question the historical emissions, right? That also is being questioned. Okay, so this is basically, once again, you can see the carbon dioxide emissions, right, from 2000 to 2020. This size of the graph also shows the the amount, right? Look at India, look at China, look at US. So this is the absolute emissions amount, and you can see per capita emissions also. Look, you can see how US has a tower of carbon dioxide. In US, one person is emitting between 2000 to 2020 such a large amount of carbon dioxide per per tons per person. But look at India, right? So developing countries, smaller countries would be again like that. Okay, so let's solve one question. So statement 1, the Paris Agreement aims to limit global temperature rise to well below 2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. This is right. Okay, 2 degrees Celsius is the target. Statement 2, the Paris Agreement requires all countries to submit nationally determined contributions. It's true, right? Statement 3, Paris Agreement legally binds countries to achieve their NDC targets. Okay, legally binds NDC target now. But the procedures, you have to submit an NDC, you have to update every 5 years, it should be in line with the principle of progression. That is all legally binding. But this statement is actually wrong. Okay, so if one statement is wrong, we can immediately go to option C. Okay, option C. And also this statement will explain the statement 1, right? There is a causal link between them. Okay, so this was the previous year question that they asked, UPSC asked. Article 6 of the Paris Agreement on Climate Change is frequently discussed in global discussions on sustainable development and climate change. Okay, it's right. Statement 2, Article 6 of the Paris Agreement on Climate Change sets out the principles of carbon markets. I told you it tries to replace the Kyoto Protocol markets, right? Article 6. So this is right. The next statement is quite tricky. Article 6 of the Paris Agreement on Climate Change intends to promote inter-country non-market strategies to reach their climate targets. Okay, non-market strategies. So don't get confused here. Just because Article 6 tries to create carbon markets, it does not mean it does not promote other strategies, right? That would be contrary to the overall objective of Paris Agreement. Okay, don't box yourself in a thinking. Article 6 actually does try to create carbon markets. Okay, that does not mean it actually do not promote non-market mechanism, right? So please read these kind of statements very carefully, because it may seem contrary to one fact that you know for sure. Okay, but think broadly. Paris Agreement is aiming to counter climate change. There is every bit likely that it will try to promote non-market mechanism as well. Okay, and Article 6, that is why I said Article 6, just go through the text of the Paris Agreement. It's very short agreement, so to get a clarity on where all these things are. Okay, so if you read Article 6, it does provide. It tries to promote a non-market mechanism. Non-market mechanism includes tech transfers, climate finance, and all those things. So these are also promoted by Article 6. So this statement is also correct, and both of them has a causal link with statement 1. They all explain the first statement. So you will reach option A. But this is kind of like a hard question, because they ask specifically about Article 6, that too in detail. Okay, so please read Paris Agreement because you are celebrating the 10th anniversary. Please read the principles associated with it. Please read about the Agenda 21 conventions, and we will discuss in another video regarding the UNCOP. We will discuss major important COPs, the conclusions, the results of various COP. Okay, so for UPSC mains, this is actually the syllabus for GS3: Conservation, Environment, Pollution, Degradation, Environment Impact Assessment. Although this is one just micro topic, huge number of questions have been asked from this area. Evaluate India's progress towards achieving its NDCs under the Paris Agreement. What challenges does India face in meeting its long-term climatic commitments? So it's very basically, this is the question they can simply ask, right? Just evaluate. Right, so you have to say what are the targets, what is the progress so far, and what are the challenges in meeting those commitments. Okay, that should be your structure. So please prepare for climate change related questions, but for both prelims and mains. Assess India's progress on that front, as well as the world initiatives by the world as well. So that's all on this session. See you in another session on current affairs. Thank you.